Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring How to Love Better with its author, Yung Pueblo. This book reflects on healing, self-awareness, and how inner growth transforms the way we love others. Thank you, Sunny. It's good to be here. How to Love Better is really about understanding ourselves more deeply so that our relationships can become healthier, more honest, and, well, more compassionate.
I am so glad we have the time to really go deep on this. I was thinking we could structure our conversation today much like you structured the book itself. We could start with your own story, which I think does such a beautiful job of grounding this work in reality. Then we can move into what you call the inner relationship and what it actually means to thrive. After that, maybe touch on those common hurdles, where we all tend to stumble. And then finally, bring it all together into what the daily practice of love looks like. How does that sound to you?
That sounds perfect. So let's just dive right in. Yung, you start the book in such a vulnerable place with a story of your early relationship with your wife, Sarah. You call it an emotional hurricane. And that's not how most books on love begin, right? They usually start with ideals. So why was it so important for you to begin with the struggle?
Well, it just felt like the only honest place to start. The truth of it is, Sarah and I, we had this immediate, really powerful connection. It was almost like, for the first time, I felt like someone was truly hearing me. But that feeling, as strong as it wasn't enough to carry us. Pretty soon after we got together, let's call them gaps in our emotional maturity, started showing up. And we fought. We fought really bitterly. It just became the cycle, meeting anger with more anger, tension with more tension. Our main way of showing our pain was just to blame the other person. We were basically just throwing our own inner chaos at each other.
So it sounds like this incredible paradox was happening. This deep, undeniable connection on one hand, and this really painful, constant conflict on the other. It's almost like the feeling of love was there, but the skills, the tools, they were missing. That's exactly it. And that's really the understanding we finally came to. We knew we wanted to build a life together, but we didn't know how. We hadn't realized that our own individual unresolved stuff was the actual source of all the conflict. The connection alone, it couldn't create peace. And honestly, we were just exhausted by the tension. It was right around then that a friend suggested we try meditation. We were at a point where we were open to anything. And that one suggestion, it really kicked off a whole new chapter for us. It started us on this path inward, a path away from that battlefield we'd created. So, when you started that inward turn, how did that actually start to change the dynamic between you? How did it help you get out of that blame game you were stuck in? Well, meditation started to cultivate the very things that were missing in both of us. Things like a real sense of awareness, the ability to just pause instead of reacting, and a genuine compassion, not just for each other, but for ourselves. And as we started to heal individually, our minds literally became calmer. And in that quiet space, we could finally see that an argument doesn't need a winner. It doesn't need a right person and a wrong person. What was actually missing was just sincere listening. We were missing understanding. And that became the fundamental insight for us. The only way we could truly love each other better was to first make a real commitment to healing ourselves. That realization right there, that the path to a better relationship was actually an inward path, that feels like the absolute heart of this book. And it brings us right to this central theme you explore, the relationship with yourself being the foundation for everything else. For someone listening, that might sound a little counterintuitive. The idea that to improve my relationship with my partner, I need to focus on myself. Can you walk us through how that connection works? How does tending to your own inner garden actually help the garden you're trying to grow with someone else? Oh, it's the most direct connection there is. Think about it. If you are unable to see yourself clearly, with all your own patterns, your own habits, you're definitely going to struggle to see another person clearly. And loving yourself well, it isn't just about bubble baths and feeling good. It's about doing the really hard work of letting go of old versions of yourself that just don't support your growth anymore. It's about being brutally honest about your own contributions to conflict. And that kind of inner work, it takes a ton of self-awareness and even more humility. I love how you frame self-awareness. It's not just knowing things about yourself, but seeing the vast universe inside. What does that perspective really mean to you? How does seeing it that way change things? What it really means is taking an honest inventory of who you are, but without that harsh judgment we so often bring. You start to see your own imperfections not with shame, but with this kind of objective observation. And that observation is what actually makes real progress possible.
When you can look at your own patterns and just say, ah, there it is again, without falling apart, well, then you can actually choose to do something different. And a funny thing starts to happen. As you start to accept your own ups and downs, this natural patience and compassion it starts to bloom. You get gentler with yourself. And that gentleness just inevitably starts extending to other people. I saw it so clearly in my own life. As my own mind got lighter, all my relationships, not just with Sarah, but with everyone, they just became more easeful. The energy I was putting out there was just calmer.
It really sounds like it's about taking this kind of radical responsibility for your own inner world. And the quote you share from Thich Nhat Hanh, wow, it speaks to this so powerfully. It feels like the ultimate acceptance of our own part to play in our lives and in our relationships.
So once we start doing this inner work, this healing, your book suggests that we can then move from just coping with life to a state of actually, truly thriving.
Yes, exactly. Because healing isn't really the end goal, it's just the beginning. To truly thrive, you need a practice that you can sustain, something that helps you gently undo all those old, dense patterns that keep your past alive in your present. It's a long-term journey, and the mission for each of us is to find what really works for you. For some people it's meditation, for others it might be therapy or journaling, or even just time in nature. The key is that it needs to be challenging enough to create real change, but not so overwhelming that you just give up.
You lay out these 11 attributes of thriving, and what really strikes me is how many of them feel like this quiet rebellion against our modern culture. I'm looking specifically at things like stop glorifying busy and remind yourself to slow down. They feel so deeply connected. Can you talk a little about that relationship between the speed of our lives and our ability to actually thrive?
Oh, they're absolutely connected. Our society pushes us to move at a completely unreasonable speed, and we end up internalizing that pressure. We start to believe that busy equals important. But all that speed really does is create enormous tension in our minds and our bodies. So slowing down, that's how you reclaim your own rhythm. It's how you ground yourself in the present moment. And it's only when you're really grounded in the present that you can start to hear your intuition. And that intuition is your inner compass. It's that quiet voice that guides you toward your own authentic growth. Following it relentlessly, that's how you build a life that is truly yours, not one that's just been prescribed to you by all these external pressures.
And it seems like living that way leads to a completely different definition of happiness than the one we're usually sold, right? It's not about chasing the next high or getting the next thing.
Exactly. So many people confuse happiness with pleasure, but pleasure is fleeting, and the constant chase for it just creates more tension.
True happiness, the way I see it, is an internally cultivated state. It's that deep peace that comes from a mind that isn't reacting to every little thing. It's a simple joy that comes from just being fully present. And both of those qualities, they come from what's called an equanimous mind, a mind that's balanced and steady, a mind that can observe the world without desperately trying to cling to it or push it away. Of course, cultivating that kind of mind is a lifelong practice, not a destination. And the path is definitely not a straight line. The book is so honest about the obstacles, about where we all stumble. And you identify the biggest of these challenges as attachment. Yes, without a doubt. Attachment is the primary obstacle to both inner peace and to healthy love. You define it as a deep form of inflexibility. I find that so incredibly insightful. It's not just about wanting things, it's this rigid demand that reality itself bend to what we want. That really is the heart of it. It's this deep craving for control over outcomes, over people, over situations. And chasing that kind of control, it's like chasing a mirage in the desert. We think it's going to make us feel safe, but it's an illusion, and a really stressful one. It just creates constant anxiety because reality, by its very nature, is uncontrollable. The only things you can really control are your own actions and your own responses. So the antidote to attachment isn't indifference. It's actually embracing change. It's understanding that life is this river of impermanence. The only way to find peace is to learn how to let go and just flow with it, not try to build dams against it. So would it be fair to say then that our attachments are often really just attachments to the past, attachments to old hurts or old expectations that we're still carrying around? Yes, very much so. The mind has a really hard time letting go. And that's why our impulsive reactions in the present moment often have very little to do with what's actually happening. They act like these little bridges, instantly connecting something you see or hear right now with a powerful, unresolved feeling from your past. The intensity of our reaction is actually a clue. It shows you just how deeply the past still has a hold on your mind. My own reactions, they used to be so loud, so defensive, and they created so much pain in my relationship with Sarah.
because my unresolved past was literally blocking a peaceful present from even being possible. So the whole healing journey then is really about learning to move from reacting to responding. In a tough moment with a partner, what does that pause, that space between a reaction and a response, what does that actually feel like? How do you even begin to cultivate that? Sometimes it just feels like taking a breath. That's it. A reaction is impulsive, it's an echo of the past, it's automatic, it's defensive, and it always creates more tension. A response, that's an intentional choice you make in the present moment. It's open, it creates the possibility for understanding, for harmony. That little pause, that is where your freedom lives. But it doesn't just show up on its own. You have to train it. You have to intentionally practice pausing, taking that breath, and then choosing a different, more constructive way to act. And over time, with that repetition, the pause becomes more natural, and responding, that becomes your new habit.
And that feels like the perfect bridge to our final section here. After we do all this profound inner work, learning about ourselves, learning to pause, learning to respond, how do we then bring that new, calmer self into our relationships and actually practice love differently? You distill it all down to 3 essential qualities: kindness, growth, and compassion. Now, kindness seems so simple, but in the middle of a conflict, it can be the very first thing to just disappear. How do you hold on to kindness when you're feeling hurt? You have to remember that your partner is your friend. Even in a really tough moment, they are not your enemy. The goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is to solve the miscommunication together. When you can view it as the two of you versus the problem instead of you versus them, that's the key to holding on to kindness. And you call growth the greenest of green flags. Why is a commitment to personal growth so vital in a partner? Because nobody is perfect. We all come with our patterns and our histories. So finding a partner who is willing to take responsibility, who is genuinely open to learning and adapting, that shows immense inner strength. It shows they have what it takes to navigate the hard moments that will inevitably come up in any long-term relationship. When both people are committed to their own growth, that's when the real magic of a relationship can flourish. And then finally, compassion. That's the ability to truly try to see the world from your partner's perspective. It takes humility, for sure, but it's what makes their happiness feel just as important as your own.
And you offer some really practical strategies here. I'm looking at number 3 and 4. It's not always their fault, and remember they are not your enemy. These seem to be about de-escalating our own internal state during a conflict.
They are. In the heat of a moment, tension can completely warp your reasoning. It is so easy to place 100% of the blame on your partner. But having the inner strength to recognize and actually own your part in a conflict, that is a sign of real maturity. And in the same way, our old wounds can make us so incredibly defensive. They put us in this survival mode where the person we love suddenly looks like a threat. Learning to consciously pull yourself out of that mode and remember that you're speaking to someone you care for, that can transform an argument from a battle into a chance to understand each other on a much deeper level.
Towards the end of the book, you offer this question: how can I love you better? What I find so moving about this is its humility. It's an admission that you don't actually have all the answers about your partner. That is exactly why it's so powerful. It acknowledges a really simple truth. People change. Your partner is not the same person they were 5 years ago or even 1 year ago. Their needs, their dreams, their preferences, all of it evolves. So loving them well means you need current information. You can't just keep operating on old assumptions. This question moves love from a place of assumption to a place of active, humble listening. It's a key tool in consciously designing a unique culture for your relationship, one that actually works for the two people who are in it right now.
This final thought from the book, it really feels like the perfect summation of our entire conversation today. Love isn't some magical thing that just happens to us and solves everything. It's more like a construction project. It really is. It requires so much patience and intention from two people who are both committed to creating a space where they can feel safe enough to be their most authentic selves. That safety, that is the home that love builds. Yung, thank you for walking us through how to love better. This conversation offers our listeners a gentle and honest framework for growing in love.
Thank you, Sunny. I hope these reflections help people build healthier relationships by continuing to heal themselves. This has been Sunny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.